Nestled on the western edge of Port Phillip Bay, an hour and a half's drive from the deadly intrigues of Melbourne, lies Gateway City, the hub of the region, G-Town. For the last 4 decades, an uneasy peace has existed between the Anarchs and Camarilla in G-Town, their borders meeting on Bruce Street in the very centre of the city. The two sects divide the domain neatly in two. The native Anarchs, consolidated in the industrial north, have learned to tolerate Prince Aveline and her Camarilla invaders, and she in turn grants all Anarchs the right to hunt and conduct business in her waterfront domain. Anarch rabble-rousers and Camarilla traditionalists each afford their counterparts a reluctant respect. Until now. Word from Melbourne has reached the kindred of G-Town. Prince Squizzy wages a war on 3 fronts against a newly reorganised Anarch faction, Sabbat infiltrators, and the onslaught of the Second Inquisition. As refugees from both sects flood into Gateway to escape the oncoming chaos, local tensions flare, and the truce that has maintained peace since 1983 will be pushed to its limits. Welcome to Lords of G-Town, a Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition actual play podcast presented by DM Fiat Podcast, with music by Kevin MacLeod, White Bat Audio, Ivan Duch, and Jaxius Music. Now, as the sun sets on the city and the blood stirs, let's see what horrors the kindred face this night. Welcome to a Lords of G-Town bonus episode. The following are a series of retellings of the coterie's Downtime actions, performed through text on the podcast's Discord. Barton University's STEM building isn't much to look at. It's a big, windowless block of concrete, utilitarian, postmodern design from the 1970s that stands out among artistic modern architecture from the turn of the century. The students say it's an eyesore, evidence of the university's notorious underfunding of non-arts faculties. Mitch used to think the same, until he got his PhD and was inducted into the lofty ranks of the academics who call it home. Now, Mitch sees it as a monument to Hawthorne's control. It's a monster's haven, not a place of learning. "Take a seat," orders Hawthorne as Mitch enters his office, gesturing to the leather chair in front of the desk. He watches Mitch curiously as he makes himself comfortable, Hawthorne's eyes ever calculating, analysing. "How's your research going?" he asks, his voice patient and friendly, but laced with condescension. He asks the question now the same way he did all those years ago, as if he's waiting to point out exactly what Mitch has done wrong, show him how he's still Mitch's intellectual superior. Fine," Mitch says. Making progress, I think." Good, Hawthorne purrs. "But you're straying from the paradigm I taught you." He rolls up a sleeve of his knitted academic vest and bites into it, drawing blood. He holds it under Mitch's face. "Drink," he orders. His eyes meet Mitch's. As Mitch leans forwards to partake in the gift, Hawthorne nods approvingly as Mitch's tongue glides across the leathery skin like autumn leaves. "You know, when I was embraced, this building was brand new," he says wistfully. "Nobody thought it was an eyesore back then. Times have changed, though. Lots of people blazing new trails, discovering new paradigms, but most of them are wrong." He pulls his wrist away, winding down his sleeve. "Now, my child." Hawthorne's mask twists into one of fatherly disappointment.
I ordered you to make sure the Anarchs left that rant in disarray. With Barry Lovelace's treachery, everything was primed for success. Why did you hold your tongue? The head rush of feeding was much worse than usual, moved along by the fact that Mitch, still covered in bite marks from his run-in with Barry Jr., his entire body aches, not only with the lingering pain, but with the overwhelming itch that he has betrayed his blood bond, made only the stronger by strengthening it by feeding on Hawthorne's blood. It is comforting, though, he thinks, to be close to his sire, a sort of safety that makes Mitch feel like a child under the watchful eye of a parent. So when he pulls back and hears the tone, that tone in Hawthorne's voice, it makes something clench inside of him. Nausea washes over him. It wasn't the right time, Mitch says, softly, speaking into his thumb as he begins to chew the skin on the tip of it. We had just been attacked. If I had said anything, it would have been a terrible look for the cam. Things would have been made worse. He realizes he's mumbling. I'm sorry, he says. I really am. I didn't want to make more work for you by making a big mess after things have already gotten so bad. I'll make it up to you, I promise. You know I'd do anything for you, Doctor. Hawthorne sighs and leans back in his chair. It's a sigh Mitch knows well, the one that prefaces him destroying an entire thesis with one simple observation. You're one of Samantha Stokes' envoys. Your job is to keep relations between the Anarchs and the Camarilla running smoothly. All you needed to do was point out that this was not the time, and they'd have listened. Mitch must make a charisma plus etiquette roll, promising he'll do anything to make it up to Hawthorne. Mitch gets 3 successes. He squirms in his seat, caught between his own feelings on the situation and the tug of the blood bond to just agree and prostrate himself. I'm not sure they would have, but not to doubt you, of course, but things had gotten chaotic. They had just found out about a massive betrayal, and to attempt to immediately butt in with cam talk they would have thought we were, scheming, I think. Hawthorne sighs, leaning back in his chair. He waits for Mitch to finish and shakes his head. That was the whole point, Mitchell, to plant the seed of doubt. Let them know that the Camarilla is aware of their internal troubles, that they shouldn't forget that we exist, and that we are watching them. Always. He raises a palm to his pale forehead, rests it there, sitting in silence for a moment. Then, as he lowers it, he smiles. The smile of a father who needs to explain something to a child who doesn't know any better. You know, Prince Aveline's prepared to offer boons and status to whoever's well-placed to observe the Anarchs up close. I was hoping it would be us, reaping that reward. Who else is better equipped to analyze and understand the multitude of data that would result from such an exercise? I don't simply see it as court gossip like your harpy friend. I mean, we must truly understand it, provide the prince with real insights. He sighs again, disappointed. Well, there's no point crying over spilled milk, is there? Now we're locked onto this path. The other possibilities closed off. He beckons for Mitch to rise from his seat, and as he does, Hawthorne leans over the desk, looking into his eyes. Perhaps in the future you'll do better with a firm, guiding hand, just like when I was the supervisor and you were the student. His dark eyes glimmer in the moonlight shining through the window behind him as the sheer force of his will assaults Mitch's mind. Val's style has never been to leave loose ends undealt with. This is probably the biggest loose end she's had in her 21 years of unlife. Ophelia, ex-school of the late warlord Victor von Strudeldorf, selling the secrets of the Anarchs to the highest bidder, and doing it with Val's blood running through her veins. She promised she'd use the borrowed time to settle her affairs and then gracefully meet the end, but she's clearly not ready to go yet, and she knows enough to be valuable to someone. Tonight, at Elysium, as Prince Aveline's court gathers in the main hall of the G-Town Central Library, surrounded by culture, the eyes of the other kindred silently judge Valerie, exchange whispered rumours behind her back. They say she gave vitae to the Anarch Warlord's ghoul. They never say it to her face. Nobody has the balls to disrespect one of Jeanette's harpies, one who also happens to be the child of the Keeper of Elysium. But Val has her ways. She can read the room just as if it were one of the volumes adorning the tall bookshelves that line the hall. Ordinarily, having a ghoul isn't a topic worthy of courtly intrigue, but when it's a harpy, and when she's ghouled someone who's a font of Anarch secrets without consulting the prince first, well, if it were anyone else, Val'd be having a field day. And so, she has to tie up loose ends. Val, sure of herself that she's got this in the bag, approaches the prince directly, an entire spiel cocked and ready. My prince, if I may have a moment of your time? As a harpy, she always has Prince Aveline's ear. She's a low-level harpy, though, and she's always busy. As Val approaches the prince, the inner circle watches like a murder of crows, whispering in hushed voices. Some of them try to distract her with meaningless small talk, pushing their social weight to make Val's night a bit more annoying, just for the hell of it. It's a test. Prince Aveline loves her Toreador games. She wants to see how well Val navigates the veiled barbs and deflects the gossip. It's how she knows whether Val's worth her time. Val needs to roll a charisma plus etiquette or politics check using her presence to gain a bonus. It's 3 successes. Child's play. The sudden onslaught of attention might be off-putting to a neonate fresh off the block, but Val's a harpy. She meets each barb with one of her own, deftly navigating the judging stares and the insults veiled as small talk. Prince Aveline taps the crystal wine glass in her hand, silencing the crowd. With a silent motion, she orders them to disperse and beckons Val close. Well, you have my attention, dear, she says in a saccharine sing-song voice. You wish to obtain my blessing and make this Ophelia your retainer, do you not? An impulsive display from one of Jeanette's harpies, but I'm feeling generous tonight. Enlighten me then. Why should I grant you this boon? It's time. Val clears her throat to echo the clinging of the wine glass and breaks forth into full peacock display, a gleeful bow. But, my prince, I would not call upon you for assistance or your blessing. This is not the way of things here in Elysium. This is your domain. And as such, I have not prepared a gift for myself, but for you. Only the quick thinking of your finer subjects could bring you an informant, and a docile one at that. Ophelia! She cries and claps her hands, beckoning the old woman from the shadows, murmuring, "A living dossier on von Strudeldorf. All I ask for is compensation for my hard work." The court gasps as a dishevelled-looking old lady shuffles out from the library foyer. Excited murmurs buzz through the crowd, and Val feels the eyes of the entire camarilla upon her. A mortal? In Elysium? What is she thinking? Ophelia stops in her tracks, instantly aware of the attention she's receiving. It's clear by the look on her face that she's never seen this many vampires in one room before. Encouragingly, Val flashes her a smile and beckons her to join her in front of the prince. She hesitates for the briefest second, then nods and dashes across the hall to Val's side. Prince Aveline stares into Ophelia's eyes, pursing her lips. As she sizes the old woman up, it's obvious to Val that she's reading her aura, silently probing her soul with questions. After a moment, Aveline smiles, waves Ophelia away. A dossier, not just on Strudeldorf, but a font of knowledge of all the inner workings of the waterfront anarchs, as imparted to her by her domitor, she says. But what of you? Why bring her to me and not to Jeanette, your own sire? A small "Pho" passes Val's lips, and she performs cartwheels with her wrist. The times are changing, my prince. The world as we know it moves and flows around us. Jeanette has significant influence in connections, but there's truly a limit on how much water you can draw from a well. It's important to diversify. is it not? The cartwheels turn to pacing, around the room, past the onlookers. I've seen how the Anarchs are running their show. Blood is being spilled. It is best that we play our cards well, not for the most cash in hand. An investment. Believe this to be the best investment. Murmurs once again surge through the hushed court. Nobody is judging Val now. If they are, they're keeping it to themselves. She's a harpy, at home on the social battlefield, deftly manipulating courtly intrigue as a spinner weaves a thread. An inside source? Someone whispers. Yes, a sleeper agent. The Ancillate nod their heads at her, impressed, while the neonates simply stand silent, taking notes, too afraid to speak out of turn. Oh, very well, says Prince Aveline, gracefully sipping from her wine glass. She licks dregs of red off her lips, and then smiles. You've convinced me. An investment. Jeanette does select her harpies well, and your sire, the Keeper of Elysium, well, I could expect no less of your initiative. She taps her wine glass once more, commanding the attention of the court. Ordinarily, in these trying times, where the masquerade is more important than ever, any mortal brought into our fold is a liability. But Valerie has chosen well. With Ophelia in her service, we have an opportunity to learn more about the Anarchs in this city than we have ever before. Perhaps with her help, we will finally be able to gain the upper hand. She levels her face to Val. She is yours. I trust that you will utilize the knowledge she provides you with to advance the interests of this court. Hunter or not, Elaine is determined to treat Tig's guest to the loveliest dinner she can muster. It's tradition, Tig, she tells him as she dashes to between the oven and the kitchen sink, putting the finishing touches on a leg of roast lamb. You want to know what someone really thinks of you, you get 'em over for a nice dinner and some drinks. God knows it's how it is when the family gets together for Christmas. Tig's not even sure Lucky's going to take him up on his invitation. He's half expecting her to call through and cancel or just not show up at all. Ghosting you, as the boy calls it. If he were a vampire hunter after all, he'd think twice about going to dinner with one of the things, even if they saved him from the ravages of disease. And yet, sure enough, Dad, calls Tig's granddaughter from the lounge room. Someone's at the door. It's an old lady and, whoa, she dresses cool. Well, she turned up, says Elaine, her back turned to Tig as she studies the lamb, her body outlined in bright orange light. Means she keeps her word at least, and she's got balls. Half an hour later, cutlery and plates rattle as Elaine dashes around the kitchen table, scooping up everyone's soup bowls. Lucky drains the last dregs of minestrone from her bowl, places it on top of the stack. Oh, good tucker, she says, smiling. I was half expecting blood. Don't fill yourself up, darling, says Elaine, handing her a handkerchief to wipe up some spillage on the front of her leather vest. Lamb's still to come. Sunday roast, eh? Says Lucky, leaning back in her seat. Seems almost normal. Indeed, it does. The television in the corner of the room bathes the dinner table in a neon glow as a newsreader recaps the highlights of the night's footy game. Even Tig's son and granddaughter seem at ease, tuned out, lazily scrolling through something on their phones as they wait for the main course. Almost normal's more or less how it goes round here, Tig says, taking a long pull of Carlton Draught. Truth is, I'm a lucky man. Without Elaine, things would have turned out much worse for me. Not just me neither. Tig's eyes flick to his kids. Lucky matches Tig's motion, silently toasting him as she takes a sip of beer from her own can. I gotta say, normal's the last thing I expected. You did me a good favour, Tig, but dinner with a bloodsucker isn't something most people would jump at the chance of. I admit part of it was curiosity. How on God's green earth does a bloodsucker live a normal family life? Well, your wife and kids are Renfields, sure, but could almost be forgiven for thinking this is a normal Sunday dinner. Renfield? Says Tig's granddaughter, looking up from her phone. What's a Renfield? You know, from Dracula, says the boy, doing a comical impression of Bela Lugosi, complete with affected accent. I want to suck your blood. Oh, you know, he gives you his blood, and yeah, Renfield. Oh, I get it, says Tig's granddaughter, like Bella from Twilight. At this, Lucky lets out a hearty laugh. Some family you got here, Tig. But I have to ask. Look, what you did for me was a life or death thing, but your wife, your kid, why bring them into this world at all? Why trap them in this? Your boy'd be, what, 50? Try again, miss, says the boy. Dad's only been a vamp for 20 years. Was only 16 when he got turned. There's a lot of talk about it, Tig says. Elaine, truth is that there was a selfish choice. It was because I'd be lost without her, and her mother went out young, about 70, so I knew I'd be alone in this mess without her in a matter of years if I didn't. Wallace here? Wallace has some problems like what you got. Chemo was rucking him up bad before he went on the hay positive. But now, me granddaughter, she ain't on the blood. She me grandkid, just visiting while her mam's out in Melbourne, protesting one of them pronoun marches or something. Elaine emerges from the kitchen and begins laying plates of roast lamb, mashed potatoes and veggies down on the table. It's the fine china, Tig notices. She places the gravy boat down on the centre, the plate with the gold edging that have been used maybe 3 times in as many decades. Wallace whistles approvingly, smacking his lips before grabbing his fork and shoveling a mouthful of potato down his gob, spilling chunks all over the tablecloth. Elaine glares across the table at him as she sinks into her seat next to Tig. Wallace, at least say grace first, she says. Oh yeah, says Wallace. He grunts it out while he chews. 2, 4, 6, 8, bog in, don't wait. Sorry about that, Elaine says to Lucky, handing her a knife and a fork. We told him to be on his best behaviour. No biggie, Lucky says. No such thing as God anyway, not when there's all these monsters prowling the night. No offence. She cuts off a piece of meat, sticks it in her mouth, and savours it. Well, you remember how to cook like people at least. And look, Tig, I can't blame you for turning your boy into a Renfield. Not one to judge after what I asked you to do to me. It's good that you can acknowledge you made mistakes as well. I suppose the question is, if Elaine had a say in this, if she said she wanted to live out her life normally, would you let her? I don't want to though, says Elaine, carefully drizzling gravy over her plate. Not sure my heart could go on beating if I stopped, and this big lug, she elbows Tig, needs me. Right, says Lucky. Just hypothetically, though. It's easy enough for a bloodsucker to say they did wrong. Actually acting on it, though, if Elaine said she was done, would you have a problem with that? Tig bows his head and thinks, and Meredith's words come back to him, the snake-eyed woman speaking about how he needs to shed mortal ties. Elaine can see the old arguments and discussions and worries and fears coming back to him, playing on his face as he thinks hard. Of course I'd have a problem with it, he says, carving a piece of the roast. 'Cause I love her. I'd be losing someone I couldn't never get back. I'd be lost myself, but, he says, looking over at the cross on the wall, we promised till death do us part, and well, I'm dead, and both of us know that this ain't forever. Nobody gets forever. So we discuss things. When she's ready, she'll make a choice, and we'll deal with what comes, one way or the other. Wouldn't be right to her if I made all the choices. Ain't what I want. But for now, we got a little more time together. He looks up, and his eyes sharpen on Lucky. Don't be too sure about God, though. Ain't no way to tell for certain till you get there. And I see him in the little things. Mercy, kindness, birth of a newborn calf, and the mama's grace, storms out on the horizon. Tig needs me just as much as I need him, Elaine cuts in. He's never been the sharpest tool in the shed. At least when it comes to intrigue. But I've read all of Anne Rice, I have. I watch all the soaps. I know how it goes. Easy to lose sight of little things when you're dealing with monsters, yeah, but I ain't ready to write 'em off. There's something out there, could be God for all I knows. Tig reaches over and squeezes Elaine's hand. She's a fucking wonder, won't lie. Honestly, if it were the other way around, she'd be Baron of the City by now, and I'd be tending the day-to-day stuff. Tig has to make a composure plus persuade roll. He's made a good impression on Lucky, but he is still a vampire. She's still a hunter. He needs to word these things just the right way so she knows he's genuine. He burns a willpower and ends up with 2. Anyways, we got something to decide, but I can wait till after dinner. Tig stays quiet and eats while Elaine takes Lucky's measure. Lucky swallows a mouthful of mashed potatoes, silently contemplating Tig and Elaine's words. I'll be honest. Sounds like Elaine's the brains around here. Sounds like you're letting her make her own choices. Sounds like, because as far as I know, vamps have a way of making you think you're acting of your own free will when really you're just doing their bidding. but I'd like to give you the benefit of the doubt. See, by the time you met me, all those years ago, I'd already started having second thoughts about this hunting thing. Killing monsters for the sake of them being monsters. Don't get me wrong, a lot of you are monsters, but some of you seem to have learned how to act like people. Only after sitting down and eating dinner with you and your family, I'm starting to wonder if it's just an act after all. Just because you're dead doesn't mean you have to turn into a fucking cunt, Elaine says. Pardon the French. True, Lucky says, nodding. And yes, most of the time, the not being a cunt part is just an act. But I'm having a hard time telling with you, for what it's worth, and I'm glad I didn't stake you and leave you out for the sun that night. Well, that's right neighbourly of you, Tig says, taking a pull of beer. Don't get me wrong, I ain't a great fella, done some stuff in me time too, but seen enough assholes, I got no desire to be more of one than what I got to. Eventually, dinner winds down. Elaine gathers up everyone's plates and beckons Tig to follow her into the kitchen. Got to see if I pass the test, Lucky says, leaning back in her seat. No probs, you have a nice chat. I'll light up a ciggy in the meantime. As soon as Tig's in the kitchen, Elaine hands him a stack of plates and tasks him with washing up. Don't scratch 'em, she warns. Tig nods and dutifully gets to work, filling the sink with lukewarm water and squeezing a few drops of detergent into it. As he pulls on the rubber gloves, Elaine smiles. So, I've got some things to say, but first we're a team, so what do you think of her? Well, she didn't try to put me in the dirt 20 years back, so I reckon she's on the level there at least. On the other hand, and when I give her blood, she said that if she didn't end up taking care of the bar, she might just use her remaining time to go stake a few more bloodsuckers, so there's a risk there. That is, small one maybe though. But you did get her bar back up and running, didn't you? Elaine asks. Or at least your friend Val did. Kinda get the impression that if she had a problem with me, she'd just come after me, not you or the kids, so that's one in her favour. So it shouldn't be a problem. Right, so the way I see it is you've helped her out, same as you did with Wallace, and she's grateful for it, and furthermore, she doesn't want you to turn into cigarette ash. But you and your mates were attacked by hunters at least twice during this whole Barry ordeal. There's clearly those out there who do want to kill monsters for the sake of killing monsters, so I think having someone like her who's old enough to be open-minded and has seen with her own two peepers not every bloodsucker's out here to cause trouble would be a good long-term investment. As she finishes her assessment, Tig can't help but think about how she describes Lucky as an investment. It's the same way most vampires would. Maybe she does get this undeath thing better than he does. Tig nods, brushes his moustache down. Righto, gotta top off the old tank, and then we'll discuss business. Seal the deal. Bouncer's always been the glue. Even before she was embraced, when Melissa was still just a bartender and the old owner was riding everyone's asses, she was the one who kept everyone working together. Whenever anyone had a problem, Bouncer was there. The big sister, the team mum, ready with a keen ear and an attitude for whoever deserved it. The last 20 years have added the usual complications of undeath into the mix, with anarch backstabbing, cam scheming, and the occasional poaching fledgling to beat the shit out of, but Melissa and the girls still know the Bouncer's got their backs. And so, with Lisa gone, Melissa fussing about the girls that remain and working overtime to make sure none of them are courting trouble with Barry Lovelace or anyone like him, Bouncer's spending her nights getting back to her roots, slinging drinks to drunks, half passed out at the bar, laying down the law whenever a patron decides to let his hands wander, and making herself the queen of this den of iniquity, gliding through the mass of congealed, sweaty bodies on the dance floor like a shark in Cowie's Bay. She's going through the motions, pretending to be human, being the glue that holds this place together. The old routines come back to her quite nicely. It's like riding a bike. If riding a bike entailed serving drinks, checking dress codes, and giving the girls lifts to O'Tolly's for breakfast after the club closes at 4 a.m. Everything's uneventful for the first few nights, and every time Melissa sees Bouncer, she thanks her profusely for helping her hold down the fort, promising she'll make it up to her. Just after midnight on the fourth night, Bouncer's enjoying some time to herself in the change rooms backstage, reflecting that even undeath hasn't made being on her feet all night any less tiring. One of the girls comes barging in, her eyes wide and her face drenched in sweat. Pip, come quick! Some creep's got a knife! The beast grumbles with annoyance as Bouncer lets the girl lead her out onto the dance floor, where a crowd has formed around one of the booths. One of the serving girls, Clara, cowers behind a table as a shirtless, almost skeletal man just as wildly with a pocket knife. His eyes are bloodshot and spittle runs down his face as he rants. Bitch! I gave you me last hundo! You gotta put out, bitch! As Bouncer's boots echo on the tiles, the scared girls turn to her, silently begging her to intervene. She decides to stay professional, and for Bouncer, intimidation is her being professional. So she rolls a strength intimidate roll and gets a critical 7. A simple glance is all it takes for her to diffuse the man's fury. He turns to face Bouncer, splutters incoherently, then drops the knife on the floor. I didn't want to cause trouble, I just... Get him out of here. Bouncer barks at the bartender, who stepped out onto the dance floor. He approaches the man, tersely clasps a hand on his shoulder, and leads him away. Her eyes still wide with fear, Clara stares at Bouncer from the booth. Thanks, Pip, she breathes. Cross's guilt is part of it. It thinks so, at least. There's also Mort, ever methodical, their emaciated face almost a bare skull, the visage of the Grim Reaper. You are a steward of death, and death comes quietly, unseen, they impressed upon Cross. Death never announces its arrival. It simply is. And there's the Masquerade, a technicality, Cross thinks. But if it's going to last in this vampire thing for any amount of time, it needs to respect it. As it reclines on the old mattress in its haven, slowly scrolling past a news feed on its phone populated by smiling photos of the police officer it murdered, Cross very much doubts the mortals have any idea what it did. But there's always a chance, however infinitesimal, that they might figure it out. And then, Cross would be in the shit. So would Mort. The time it's spent with the coterie has made it painfully aware of how these things might come back to haunt you when you least expect it. Even 20 years later. So, Cross thinks, time to take some initiative. It's got to make it look like the cause of that cop's death was something mundane. It shouldn't be too hard. It has a few options. It could try to sneak into the police station again and plant some incriminating evidence among the cop's personal effects. Make it look like he had some enemies in G-Town's underworld. Yes, Cross thinks. Sneak in again. Worked well last time. Over a few nights, Cross tries to get a feel for the criminal landscape of G-Town. It's used to cultivating contacts among the black market, and this used to be its primary way of obtaining blood before it worked up the courage to approach and blackmail the people working in the clinics themselves. Cross hangs around the nightclubs on Bruce Street where the pushers and dealers lurk, fading into the crowds, watching and silently calculating. There are a lot of recreational drugs that move in this area, and on its third night, it even catches sight of 2 uniformed cops harassing a coke pusher, dragging him off the dance floor of a club and into the bathroom, menacing one moment and emerging the next weighed down with paper bags of cash. Cross knows what to do, waits until the club closes for the night, and in an uncharacteristic display of impulsivity, trails the coke dealer as he makes his way home, somehow lifting a baggie from him as he takes a shortcut through an alleyway. The next night, the very same baggie is tucked under a spare uniform in Constable Brick's locker in the G-Town police station, complete with an old-fashioned ransom note pieced together out of letters cut from newspapers and magazines. Give me my money or else. The night after that, all the news stories about the poor officer's mysterious and unexplained death have disappeared, replaced with the latest victim of the news cycle.